The Aztecs believed that the pyramids of Teotihuacan in Mexico were the birthplace of the world. The gods gathered there in the darkness when yet no sun had shone and no dawn had broken. 4 times before they had created and destroyed an imperfect world. Now they held council. Who will dare enter the flames to become the sun, to bring the dawn of the 5th world? The gods feared the flames. Only the diseased and humble Nanhuatzin had the courage to step forward. The spirit Jaguar followed him through the cosmic fire and gained its spots, and the spirit eagle its black wingtips. They became the most sacred of animals. The 5th world had been created. The last civilization to emerge in Mexico was thirsty for blood. The sacrifice the gods made to create the world left a debt. Humans had to pay it back with sacrifice and war. The Aztecs' reign of blood and splendor was destroyed by conquerors from Spain less than 500 years ago. But their history survives. We do know something of the origins of these people and the forces that created their cult of death. Aztec history speaks of an ancestral home, Aztlan, a lake somewhere in northern Mexico, land of the white heron, land of the Aztecs. Their stories describe how nearly 900 years ago, the gods of these lakeside people decreed they must leave. Go and seek out the cactus upon which an eagle stands in his joy. It is there that we shall fix ourselves. It is there that we shall rule, that we shall meet the other nations, and that with our weapons we shall overthrow them. Our city shall be there. The Aztecs recorded their migration in a series of simple drawings. They describe a journey partly mythical, partly real, full of mishap and adventure. The Aztecs lived as nomads in a land that was both barren and hostile. They wandered for 200 years in the wilderness to find their promised land. They were tested to the limit for 10 generations. They saw themselves as a chosen people, invincible and indestructible. The sight of a full-sized eagle on a cactus would be truly remarkable. The smaller and lighter Harris hawk is more... Survival here depends on cooperation. Hawks and eagles normally hunt alone, but Harris hawks work together. They set out at dawn on a shared hunt. A ground squirrel is the prey. Almost unique in birds of prey, maximizes the chances of flushing out the squirrel. The Aztecs, too, had to find food in a land where the only living creatures were regarded by other people as vermin. And dangerous vermin at that. The plants defend themselves with spines, the animals with poisons. Rattlesnakes abound. If you step on one by accident, it may kill you. But the Aztecs learned to hunt these creatures for food. They had little choice. The secret is to handle the snake confidently, holding the head with its poisonous fangs in a firm grip away from the human body. But rattlesnakes also had another significance to the Aztecs. 3 or 4 times a year, they shed their skin to enable them to grow. Because snakeskin cannot expand once it's hardened, the rattlesnake has to constantly discard its outer layer in favor of a fresh, supple skin. To the Aztecs, this process endowed the snake with special properties. This death dealer was the living sign of rebirth and transformation. All nature was witness to the power of the gods. And briefly, the gods would transform this barren wilderness into a garden of plenty. If the gods willed it, they would send rains. And when the rains stopped, there was a sweet harvest. For both wildlife and people, this was a time of plenty. The fruits of the prickly pear, or nopal cactus, are particularly delicious, swollen with water after the rains. The bright colors of the cactus fruit advertise that at this time of year the fruit is ripe and the seeds mature, ready for dispersal. The seeds pass undamaged through the bodies of both people and birds and are dispersed across the desert. The fresh young cactus pads are also edible, but harder work and less tasty. Another group of desert plants, the agaves or century plants, furnished the Aztecs with an incredible range of products: clothing, roofing, food and drink. The trick is to keep scraping away at an open wound in the center of the plant, where the flower spike would have been. The sugary water that would have fed the flower now bleeds from an open heart. It can either be drunk straight away as honey water, or left to ferment to become pulque, the alcoholic drink of the Aztecs. Tequila is distilled agave juice. Agaves flower just once in their lifetime. Their strategy is to spend years storing reserves of sugar and water, and then, in one huge burst of reproduction, throw up a massive flowering spike, burning themselves out. This is the only moment when an agave can produce another generation. The fluid the Aztecs were taking would otherwise have been used by the plant to produce a mass of nectar. With only one chance to bloom and reproduce, agaves must work hard to attract creatures to pollinate their flowers. The thick, fleshy leaves of the agave plant provided the Aztecs with fibers for spinning. In a wilderness without wool or leather, the agave was all of these, and rope and paper too. Once the thick outer cuticle is removed, the fine fibers inside can be spun into thread. From this they made their garments and a fiber related to sisal. With a similar texture to skin, the filmy outer layer of the agave leaf provided a kind of parchment that could be used for writing. The Aztecs developed a reputation for resourcefulness, endurance, and harsh strength in a hard land. It wasn't only cactus they cut into, and agaves whose hearts they cut out. This is a sacrificial victim impaled on a barrel cactus, having his heart removed. The gods had to be appeased, and they frequently were. The cool of the night is the time when many of the desert plants flower, particularly the giant cacti. These delicate blooms only last a few hours, unable to withstand the heat of the day. The cacti offer themselves to their most important nocturnal pollinator, the bat. The agave, during its single shot at reproduction, is open all hours, so it attracts bats in the night as well as birds of the day. Its anthers and stamens are presented high above the flowers to ensure maximum contact with the bats' bodies. For the people, the night belonged to the spirit world. Humans could enter that world through the help of plants and animals. Secretions produced on the skin of toads or in the sap of plants are a defense against predators. For the Aztecs, they were gateways to the realm of the spirits. The sacred cactus, the peyote, produces a chemical which in nature helps prevent it from being eaten. In humans, its effect is dramatic. A single peyote button, less than a mouthful, can result in a trance which may last for days. The plant takes over complete control of the senses. First, the body becomes numb, then all the senses, smell, hearing, and sight, are lost to the drug. The Aztecs had over 1,000 gods. There were gods of fire, rain, agriculture, even of the pulque drink. In the basalt rock, they carved representations of the animal spirits. The gods created the world, they could also destroy it. They represented birth, death, and rebirth. Many were decorated with snakes and skulls. After 60 years in the wilderness, the Aztec southward migration brought them into contact with the established civilizations of central Mexico. The Toltecs had dominated this land for 400 years, but the arrival of the Aztecs marked their decline. We shall never know exactly what happened, but shortly after the arrival of the desert tribes, the Toltecs were extinguished. All that remained were the stone Toltec warriors, powerless now to defend their land. The Toltecs were cosmologists, mathematicians, and artists with the discipline of military power. They disappeared, but the Aztecs spoke of them as their own ancestors, and the Toltecs' bloody sacrifices became the inspiration for Aztec ritual. The Aztecs were aware that other great civilizations had been and gone before. They knew that their own existence was a fragile one. 50 miles from Tula, the capital of the Toltecs, lies Teotihuacan. The people that once worshipped here had disappeared some 500 years before the Aztecs arrived. The Aztecs found a vast complex of pyramids and temples with nobody there. Aztec mythology was now built around this mysterious deserted city. These temples, the Aztecs reasoned, must have been the meeting place of the gods. Here, the fifth world was created. The Aztecs continued south into a land dominated by volcanoes. they entered the high plateau called the Valley of Mexico. The awesome power of the gods constantly threatened the people below. Earthquakes and eruptions reminded the Aztecs that the gods controlled this world. On the slopes of the volcanoes live plants and animals very different from those of the deserts. The mountain lion, or puma, has an extensive range, but is most often found near deer, its favored prey. This land was once the home of brown bears. Unlike the deserts, here there were streams of icy water from the cold peaks and delicate orchids in the oak forests. In these rich forests, tropical and temperate plants and animals live side by side. Here there were hummingbirds and parrots living in forests of oak and pine. The thick-billed parrot is nature's own food processor, slicing cones into shreds, destroying the seeds. It had plenty of cones to choose from. There were more than 50 species of pine in these great forests. In Aztec times, these forests covered much of the Valley of Mexico. And at their base were giant lakes fed by mountain streams, visited by millions of migrant birds. In 1311, they were visited by the Aztecs. And here, after 2 centuries, they found their promised land. Here, it is said, the prophecy was completed. The eagle landed on the cactus. The pelican is one of more than 50 species of waterbird that migrate here to overwinter. The shallow waters of these once vast lakes provided a rich supply of food for wading birds escaping the northern cold. The birds, in turn, provided a valuable food supply for the human inhabitants of the lakes. Inevitably, the shores were already densely populated by the time the Aztecs arrived. The resident tribes gave the newcomers a hostile reception. But there was one place that was uninhabited. It was uninhabitable, a small, boggy, snake-infested island, the last place on Earth anyone would choose to live. The Aztecs chose it. There they built one of the most spectacular cities on Earth, the Venice of the Americas. The Aztecs were inventive. Over the years, they dredged the shallow water to extend their island. They built canals for drainage and transport, and a vast system of fields. It took less than 100 years to build this city on a lake. The only domesticated animal was the dog. There were no horses, mules or oxen, no draft animals. No need, in fact, for the wheel. Instead, the Aztecs relied on boats and manpower. They planted vast numbers of willow trees, whose roots prevented the canal banks from eroding and collapsing into the water. The land was owned communally, a few families sharing a plot, giving the state part of the yield as tax. Nutrient-rich mud from the lake floor provided the ideal base for growing crops and enabled fields to be built up above the water table. Their farming was incredibly successful. They had no need for slash-and-burn agriculture where new land is cleared every few years. This land could be cropped continuously, year in, year out. These were some of the most productive fields in the world, feeding what soon became one of the largest cities in the world. The Aztecs learned to exploit every aspect of the lake's resources. Once the birds had migrated north for the summer, protein was in shorter supply. The Aztec dog was one alternative source, and tiny water insects were another. Both the insects themselves and their eggs were treated as delicacies. The Aztecs did have some competition on their island, but it didn't come from human beings. Raccoons are common lakeside inhabitants and feed on anything they can put their paws on. They raided the Aztecs' food stores, which included the fish in the canals. The Aztecs gave each animal a name and a character. The raccoon was known as Mapachtli, the bandit, the thief. There is a record of how the Aztecs felt about Mapachtli in their own words. It was called Mapachtli because its hands are quite like our hands. Likewise, its feet are quite like our feet. Sometimes it goes upright when it walks. And since it is a great thief, since it takes anything that it sees, and since it has human hands, a thief is also called Mapachtli. The Aztecs flourished and multiplied. Within 200 years, this city on a lake supported a population of some 300,000 people, 4 times larger than the contemporary London of Henry VIII. The courageous spirit of the animals that entered the fire at the dawn of the Fifth World. These warriors had no fear of death. Death in war was not final. The spirits of the dead could visit this world as animals. Those that died in war would appear as butterflies. Each year, millions of monarch butterflies migrate to Mexico from North America. The Aztecs saw themselves surrounded by the souls of countless heroes, wearing images of their feathered war dress, celebrating their own triumphs and the victories of the living. In early spring, as the weather warms, the butterflies begin to mate. Some 200 million butterflies overwinter in Mexico to avoid the northern cold, but even here the temperatures sometimes fall below freezing. When it does, death is everywhere. For the Aztecs, the purpose of war was not simply to slay the enemy. It was a ritualized rather than bloody battle. The skill of the warrior was judged not by his ability to kill, but to take captives unmarked, in perfect condition. These were the most valuable offerings. The Earth Goddess was particularly greedy and pitiless. Every night she devoured the sun. Only the offering of that precious liquid human blood would persuade her to release it back into the sky. At the inauguration of a new temple on the lake in 1487, thousands of prisoners were sacrificed. The killings continued for 4 days. By the year 1502, the bloody empire of the Aztecs extended from the Pacific to the Atlantic Ocean. So intimidating were these people that the maintenance of their empire required no garrisons or occupying force. The threat of war was sufficient to keep tribute pouring in from the distant corners of the empire. Aztec emperors were brought exotic offerings from far-off supplicants. The coral reefs of Mexico's Atlantic coast provided them with riches that were unthinkable during the years of their wandering in the desert. The Emperor Moctezuma demanded fresh fish. A relay of runners carried the produce some 200 miles back to his capital. Apparently, they did so within a single day. The produce of the reef also had religious significance. Inside the temple, sacrifices were made to ensure fertility. They included shells, fish, coral, as well as the most sacred of animals, the eagle and jaguar. The Aztecs traded with and exacted tribute from a whole range of peoples scattered across the different regions of Mexico. The rainforest contained particular riches. It supplied one of the Aztecs' most precious commodities, feathers. The Aztecs called their most valued featherwork the shadows of the most sacred ones. The shining beauty and rich colors of feathers were seen as fragments of the light, color, and delicacy of the world of the gods. Their demand for feathers may even have been the driving force for the expansion of empire. The Aztec feather traders ranged throughout Central America. Guatemala is an Aztec word. From here, they would have collected the feathers of birds such as the scarlet macaw. The characteristic call and eye-catching display of Moctezuma's Oropendula rings through the canopy. The brilliant yellow tail feathers were highly valued by Aztec craftsmen. But the raiding parties on the Oropendula's nests were not only human. This cowbird is watching carefully for the chance to place its own egg in an Oropendula's nest. The Oropendula lays 2 or more eggs. If the cowbird can discover a nest with just 1 egg inside, by laying one of her own, she stands a good chance of fooling the Oropendula. These hanging basket nests give enough privacy for the burglar to offload her egg into an unwitting foster family. The second egg has been laid, but this time at least the Oropendula realizes what's happened and takes it away. From the cloud forests of the tropical mountains, the Aztecs collected the feathers of the most precious bird of all, the quetzal. The emperor's headdress contained the tail feathers of hundreds of these birds. More than 10,000 quetzals were caught each year. From the deserts far to the north of Mexico came a mineral of great value, turquoise. It decorated their representations of the gods. Gold was important too. It was the color of the sun. 2 tons of gold were collected each year in tribute. In a world of uncertainty, here was a metal that would not tarnish or fade. prisoners of war provided the most valuable tribute of all. We'll never know how many died in homage to the gods, but tens of thousands must have perished. The horror of the Aztec skull racks greeted the first Europeans. Today they can still be found in the center of Mexico City. In the central square, street performers recreate Aztec dances for tourists, where once bloody rituals were enacted. No eagle flies here now, no cactus grows for his perch. And now even the sky has changed, and acid rain is washing away the stone traces which the Aztecs left behind. The Aztec Empire did not decay. It was abruptly demolished. The Aztec calendar predicted the return of a fair-skinned god, Quetzalcoatl, in the year 1 Reed. We call that year 1519. A comet in the sky, a great tongue of fire, foretold the arrival of this god from the east. But this was no god. Spaniards, led by Cortez, had arrived in search of gold. We saw them come in battle array as conquerors, and the dust rose in whirlwinds on the roads. Their spears glinted in the sun, their pennants fluttered like bats. Some of them were dressed in glittering metal from head to foot. Tame deer carried them wherever they wished to go, holding them as high as the roof of a house, and their war dogs, savage like demons. Horses with the enemies of the Aztecs. In 1519, there were 20 million Native Americans in Mexico. By 1608, only 1 million remained alive. Disease eventually killed far more than war. The Spanish conquest brought about the fusion of Catholic attitude and indigenous beliefs. Much has changed, but many Mexicans still hold a traditional attitude to death. On the 1st and 2nd of November, the churchyards become a place of celebration, full of flowers and food. On this Day of the Dead, the souls of the deceased visit friends and relatives on earth to share in the pleasures of the living. The skull is not simply a macabre decoration. It represents the worship of death and the promise of resurrection. With the demise of the Aztecs, much of the world ruled by the spirits of the Jaguar has vanished. But in certain places and at certain times, that spirit can still be glimpsed. The wildlife and cultures of Central America were both shaped by this extraordinary land. The original civilizations have gone, but the creatures and at times the spirits.